thought it would be helpful just to go through some of the basic grammar, if you will, of JavaScript. When you learn a new programming language, it's a lot like learning a new foreign language. There are new words to learn, there's new punctuation to understand, there's a whole new set of rules that you need to master in order to be able to properly communicate with your code. If you've had experience with JavaScript programming, then many of these concepts are going to be very familiar to you. But if you're new to using JavaScript and not sure about the fundamentals, this will give you a good start on some of the basics. In JavaScript, a statement is a basic programming unit. It usually represents a single step within a JavaScript program. You can kind of think of a statement as a sentence. You just string sentences together to create a paragraph, or you combine statements to create a JavaScript program, essentially. In this particular example right here, we have the statement of alert, the page is ready. And in this case, the statement is simply a single line of code. Every time you have a statement, it will always end with a semicolon. A semicolon is kind of like the period at the end of a sentence, and semicolons just make it more clear that a particular step is over and that the JavaScript interpreter should move on to the next action or the next statement. JavaScript and browsers let you use various commands to make things happen. For example, alert is a command. It makes the web browser open a dialog box and display some sort of message. The commands are usually referred to as functions or methods, and they are kind of like verbs in a sentence. They're the things that are going to get things done. There's all sorts of different commands in JavaScript, and throughout this jQuery course we're going to be looking at quite a few of them. One quick way to identify a command within a program is by the use of parentheses. So when you see parentheses, that is your visual clue that this must be a command. You deal with all sorts of different types of data every day. Within jQuery and JavaScript or without. For instance, you would tell someone your address, you would give someone your phone number, you'd tell them your birthday, you would pay for gasoline, and there would be a transaction with different amounts of money, change, what it costs, whatnot. Computer programs are kind of the same. They rely on bits of information to complete tasks. If you were going to calculate the total in a shopping cart, you would need to know the price, the quantity, and then you could create a total from that. Programming languages usually categorize information into different types, and they treat different types differently. So in JavaScript, the three most common types of data are going to be numbers, strings, and Boolean. Numbers are simply used for counting. You could calculate the cost of the gasoline, you could count down how many days until your birthday, whatever it is. Numbers are very important within a JavaScript program. You can use them to keep track of how many times a visitor has visited a website, how many times they've clicked a button, the exact position of an item on a web page, all sorts of different things. In JavaScript, a number is represented by a numeric character, like 5 or 8 or 2. You can also use fractional numbers like 8.342 or 8.5 or something like that. And you can even use negative numbers like -20. Numbers are frequently used for calculations, and sometimes you'll have mathematical operations that will occur within a program, and then you'll have numbers. So in this example, we have numbers 5 and a 15 that are being used, and they are doing a calculation where in this little snippet of code the JavaScript is going to add these two numbers together and it would print the total onto the web page. So we would get 20 as a result of this. Strings are used to display a name, a sentence, a series of letters, anything like that. A string is just a series of letters and other symbols that's enclosed inside of a quote mark. So in this example, you can see that the string is the page is ready. It's enclosed inside the quote marks right there. A string's opening quote mark signals to JavaScript that what follows is a string, and it just treats it as a series of symbols. The interpreter is going to accept the symbols literally. It will not try to interpret them as anything special to JavaScript, like a command or like numbers or anything like that. When the interpreter is going to encounter the final quote mark, then it understands that it's reached the end of the string and it'll continue on to the next part of the program. And in JavaScript, you can either use single quotes or double quotes. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Boolean data type is very simple. It's simply either true or false, and it can only be one of those two possibilities. You'll encounter Boolean data types when you create JavaScript programs that will respond to users' input and actions. So you might have a program where the user will need to type in an email address, and one question you might ask is, did the user type in a valid email address? Well, there's only two answers to that. Yes, they did, or no, they didn't, true or false. So you can use the Boolean data types to add logic to your programs. A variable is a way to store information so that you can use it later and manipulate it later on. You can think of a variable as a container. You can put all sorts of items in the container. You can empty it, you can replace it, but in the end of the day, it's always just going to be a container. The variable holds information that can vary, hence variable. When you create a variable, it's a two-step process. It's going to involve declaring the variable and naming it. So here's an example of creating a variable, var my stuff. The first part of the statement, the var, is a JavaScript keyword that creates or declares the variable. The second part of the statement is the variable name that you assign it. And the variable name can be just about anything. You just have to make sure that you don't make it a keyword. When you name the variables, a couple rules that you should follow are that variable names need to begin with a letter, or in some cases they could begin with a $sign or an underscore, but you can't have them begin with some sort of funky character or a number or something like that. Variable names can only contain letters, numbers, $sign, and underscore, so you don't want to use an ampersand or a dash or anything like that, or apostrophe. Variable names are case sensitive, so when you assign a variable, however you first declare it, that's how it will need to be used. My stuff, you can see I'm using the camel case method right here. I could not at some point in my program call my stuff all lowercase. It would not be the same. It would see it actually as a different variable. And as I mentioned, you want to avoid keywords in jQuery. So the keywords are words like alert, document, window, this, else, if, do, var, with. There are certain words that JavaScript uses for logic, and you just don't want to use those in your variable names. As a tip, you should probably make your variable names as clear and as meaningful as possible. Naming variables according to what type of data you're going to be storing in them makes it much easier when you go back to look at the programming code, and then you'll be able to understand what's going on. So I could use a variable name of just, X, but if my stuff is more descriptive, then that would be a preferred variable name as opposed to just using, some cryptic meaning. So make your variable names easy to read. Once a variable is created, then you can use the information. You can store any type of data that you want in a variable. To store data, you will use the equal sign. So if we wanted to store the value of 3 inside a variable named my stuff, we could write it like this. We could write var my stuff, that declares the variable, and then here my stuff equals 3. I am storing the number 3 in the variable. In this statement right here, the equal sign is called an assignment operator, and it's used to assign the value to the variable. You can also create a variable and store the value with just a single line of JavaScript, and you do that in a statement like this down here, var age equals 27. So in this example, the variable is being declared and we're also assigning a value to it all at once. In addition to using numbers in variables, you can also store strings, you can store numbers, you can store Boolean values, all sorts of things can be stored. So here's some examples of some other items. You can see here I have a var called first name, and it is storing a string, the name of Jane. The var last name also storing a string, the name of Doe. And then here I have a variable called age, which is storing a value of 27, a number. And then I have a var called isFemale, which is storing the Boolean value of true. So those are just some examples of how you can use variables. And finally, once you've stored a value in a variable, you can access the value simply by just calling the variable's name. So if I had the variable of my stuff, I could just say alert my stuff, and then I'm essentially accessing the variable that way. Notice that you don't use quotes on the name of a variable. The quotes are just used for the strings. So if I wrote this and it said alert quote my stuff quote, that would display the word my stuff, but it would not be the value of the variable. So you can see why strings are always enclosed in the quote marks. Otherwise the JavaScript interpreter isn't going to interpret the information the same way. So that brings me to the question of using quotes, double or single quotes. If as you go through and learn jQuery and JavaScript, you'll notice that strings are sometimes displayed in double quotes and sometimes they're displayed in single quotes. Both are right. There isn't one way that is right. It's kind of just whichever way you actually prefer to write it, so you will see it displayed in both ways. There isn't a fast and hard rule that says you have to do it this way. I generally put my strings in single quotes, but sometimes I'll put them in double quotes. Sometimes you may want to include, like sometimes you'll have to change the quotes depending on what you want to put inside the string. For instance, if you wanted to include a string that had an apostrophe in it, well, if the string, let's just say it said I can't, if you put it in single quotes, it would hit the apostrophe in between the N and the T and end up getting an error in your message. So in something like that, you would actually need to wrap that in double quotes, and then you would have it would see the single quote as part of that string variable. So those are things that you'll see as you kind of learn JavaScript. And the final thing that I want to mention is just using comments. Comments are simply just a line, or sometimes more than one line, worth of notes, and the interpreter will always ignore them, but they certainly can provide valuable information on how the logic in your program is going to work. So when you want to create comments, the syntax is pretty much the same as CSS. You'll use the double slashes to make a one-line comment, so you could just write it just like this, or you might want to put a multi-line comment, and to do that you will do the slash asterisk and then terminate the comment with a asterisk slash, and then you can put as many lines as you want. Anything within that block will be considered a comment and it will be ignored by the interpreter. I would definitely encourage you to comment, especially as you're learning the jQuery and the JavaScript, because it'll make it much more helpful as you go back and try to figure out why you're doing something or why something is working. So you might just want to put a little comment, and the comment can go before the line of code, or you could even write the line of code and then just put a slash slash, and it'll ignore everything after the slash slash. So it's really nice to just kind of write yourself a little reminder as to why you're doing something. This can be very helpful as you go about learning a new language like this. So those are some quick grammar rules, and hopefully that will assist you as you learn about jQuery and really JavaScript, since that's what it's using. So you might want to just make a note of some of the things that we discussed, and as you go through and learn, you'll notice that you'll start to see all of the things that we talked about in this lecture.